Welcome to Where the Rubber Meets the Road, a C3 podcast from Capital Life Church. This is Jeff Abiad. Today we round out our initial interview series with Pastor Julie Geddes and her powerhouse spouse, Mr. Craig Geddes, who between the two of them have a fun and interesting story that covers a good portion of the globe. We invited them down to the C3 garage last year as newlyweds, who both bring a great deal of insight and experience to a conversation about what it looks like when faith becomes practical. They continue to be an enormous blessing to our church and to our C3 community. So we hope you enjoy this conversation with Pastor Julie and Craig Geddes. So I want to begin tonight by welcoming you, Pastor Julie, Craig, to the C3 Garage.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Is it like you thought it would be?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've been doing this series called Where the Rubber Meets the Road, centered around basically your life as a vehicle and the story of your life, but we're going to use these questions just as a way to dive into who you are so our community can get to know you better and we can get to know a little bit of your story and hear some of the lessons that you've learned along the way. So the first question I want to ask you as we're jumping in here is tell us what you're driving. So by that I mean give us your name, who you are, and what you do here at the church and otherwise in life.
Sure. So I am Julie Geddes, still getting used to my new last name, and I help oversee a lot of the ministry and operations here at the church. So I oversee kind of the day-to-day ministries. I focus on our groups, which C3, we've connected with that, which has been awesome. And then also our outreach and then helping people get connected. And then some of our Sunday ministries like hospitality and connections. But then also just meeting with Pastor Bill and just helping see what his vision is and kind of putting legs to that and helping it come to fruition is kind of my overarching. And then before that, I've been in ministry for over 20 years now. I can't believe that, over full-time ministry.
Yeah.
I did missions for many years before I was working at a church. I came to Christ in college, so I'll share that more later. But right after college, I did Youth with a Mission. I know Winston and maybe some others are familiar with that, but that was an absolutely incredible experience in my life. I was in New Zealand for 6 months and then was in Malaysia and Indonesia doing an outreach and have some like crazy stories where witch doctors came to Christ and then like 3/4 of the village came to Christ and we were some of the first white people they'd ever seen. But it really awakened my desire for impacting nations and traveling outside of the U.S. and just seeing what God was doing internationally, which is a big heart of both of ours. And then went to seminary and then helped start a church, which I was a part of for about 15 years before I transitioned here.
How about you, Craig?
Yeah, hi. I'm Craig Geddes. I am a humanitarian aid worker. So this is my 20th year as well.
Wow.
Doing humanitarian aid. And out of the 20 years, 15 of those were spent overseas in Africa. And so I spend a lot of my time working in girls' education, anti-trafficking of children, education for people living with disabilities, youth workforce for youth in developing countries that cannot access jobs or income. And then the last area we work in is democracy and governance in democracy-poor countries around the world and dealing with citizen engagement and empowering youth to have citizen voice. And so that's kind of what I do for my job. And so I kind of connect the reason that I have the job I have is I am an immigrant to the United States, despite my very boring American accent. My parents are both 100% Scottish, and then I was born in Zimbabwe. And so my sister, who's passed away, but my sister, myself, and my son were all born in Zimbabwe. And I was born to parents who grew up in, older school Scotland, where it was very high church, not relational with Christ. And so that's kind of a little bit of the background that I have. And then when they moved to Zimbabwe as part of the police force before the war, they decided to start a church there. And my whole kind of belief with my career, and then of course later talking about relationship with Christ, has been kind of birthed out of that experience, out of the idea of being born in a country where truly too much is given, much is required. I strongly believe that I was given so much more opportunity than the children that I was born next to.
Yeah.
Vroom, vroom.
To answer, I guess, the dream car question.
Yeah, that's right out of the gate. We're going to be in a car here, so you guys can agree on a car as a married couple, or if you want to pick your own. You're still riding together, so.
Okay, that's good.
But what would be your?
Yes.
But yeah, so what would be your dream ride?
Yeah, it's a Jeep for me.
Any particular kind? I mean,
it's probably a Jeep Cherokee. Probably Grand Cherokee is a little too much.
Too much space.
Too much. Potential to break.
Oh, yeah.
Too much.
This is a dream.
Stuff.
It doesn't have to break.
You shouldn't be realistic now.
You've got a lifelong membership to the C3 Garage. We do repairs on those dream cars for free.
Yes.
I mean, as much as I'd love like a Lamborghini, it's not. I was kind of thinking that, why would I want to drive a Jeep? A Jeep is adventurous. It's all terrain. It can be risky, but then it can roll up to look fancy as well.
Oh, I feel that. Okay, yeah.
It's adaptable. It fits a lot of people. It fits people with disabilities.
Oh, look at that.
It can go all over. So, and then it can shine up and do what it needs to.
Look real good, yeah. All right.
For me, it's a Jeep.
I picked, probably those that know me are not super surprised, I picked a convertible.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to be riding next to the beach with the sun shining and a great sea view and the wind in my hair, playing loud music, taking a joyride.
So as we start this journey, I need you to make the startup sound of your dream vehicle. So, Craig, I'm going to hand it to you first, since you went first with the Cherokee. Give it to us. What is this going to sound like?
Like an actual guttural.
Yeah. That is the best. Oh, come on. All right, Julie. You said a convertible. Is there a particular kind of convertible you're thinking? Is this small? Does it take up a lot of space? Because
I'll do a big one, and I'll make it turquoise.
All right. Let's hear it.
Can I opt out of this question?
No, it's part of the thought experiment.
It's electric. I like you.
Is this a beep?
Vroom, vroom.
That's perfect. Talking about kind of your life that led you up to this point, you hinted a little bit at it, and we'll talk more about it in a second. But I'm just curious, between the two of you, how many countries have you been to?
He definitely has me beat, and I'm trying to catch up, but I think it's a lost cause.
Yeah.
How many countries have you been to, babe?
I've been to 39.
Wow.
As of last, 2 weeks ago.
And I've been to 83.
Oh, my goodness. Do you have a map where you're keeping track of these?
Oh,
We
yes.
do.
Yes.
That's so great.
So somebody asked him what his next 17 were to make it to 100, and I have a vested interest in this. So I was like, let's map it out. Let's map it out.
I have some ideas.
Yes.
Exactly.
So tell me about who taught you how to drive. Now, who is it in your life that brought you to this place, that got you interested in doing what you're doing?
In a literal sense, my mom taught me to drive. She was just up visiting, so I was having flashbacks to it because she would do this super dramatic prayer before we would take. She was like, "Lord, please help us," and I was like, "Mom," she was like, "What? I'm just praying." And I was like, oh, gosh. So she taught me to drive. I took a driving school, too, but she kind of helped me navigate the road.
Do you say that prayer now before you guys get on a road trip?
Oh, yeah. Lachlan loves it.
But, yeah, as far as, well, I'll let you answer first, and then I'll do the deeper part of the question.
Oh, who taught me to drive?
Yes.
Oh, some random man I remember in my neighborhood taught me to drive.
And this was in Zimbabwe?
No, this was here in the U.S.
Oh.
I remember some random man in the neighborhood was
Just volunteered?
Just volunteered how to teach me how to drive.
How did that go?
It was a little weird.
Yeah.
And then I went on a missions trip with Ron Luce,
You
who's
did?
coming on
this
Sunday.
weekend.
I went on a Teen Mania missions trip, and so I missed all of the driver's ed. So then I had to take it in the summer. And I just remember it was the most eclectic. It should have been like a Parks and Recreation episode. It was such an eclectic group of us. And I passed. And then the worst experience was learning how to drive a manual at 29 in Africa, because of course there are no automatics.
Yeah. How'd you learn?
That was awkward.
Yeah.
And a lot of incidents.
Another random man?
Yeah. No, this time it was a random woman, but whoever was available. But that helped us on our honeymoon because I drove manual the whole time. So,
but on our side of on the left side of the car or on the other side?
Other side, yeah.
It was
and we
the
were
other
on
side.
very steep hills.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's tough.
There
Making
were
my
some
palms
sermons
sweat
that
right
were-
now.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway.
Julie, do you know how to drive a manual?
No.
Do you have any desire?
I was in the passenger ride, loving life.
Yeah. Who taught you everything that you know, like when it comes to your faith and who you are?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this a little bit, but my dad got saved in Zimbabwe, and he was a Royal Mounted Police Force. And then the war started in Zimbabwe when it was called Rhodesia. And so my parents were foreign. If you think about it, there's no internet, there's no phones back then. And they started the first church with post-war with blacks and white Zimbabweans worshiping together.
Who started the church?
My parents.
How long had they been saved at the time?
2 years.
Wow. Wow.
Jump right in.
And so they started the church, and they have so many stories, and this has affected my faith sometimes when I've questioned things, because I've often gone back, you go back to the people you trust the most, which hopefully for many of us is our parents.
Yeah.
And I go back sometimes because they talk about real life transformations that like physical miracles, huge emotional miracles, things that really transform people's lives.
Yeah.
And then they talked about doing it during war. And standing up for certain things. And so in 2025, it'll be the 50th anniversary for the church. And so we'll go back and it'll be wonderful. But then they emigrated then to the United States, which was another new place. And I grew up, just like many of us, been a Christian since I was 4 years old, grew up in that whole dynamic of being a pastor's kid and a missionary's kid. And doing things like, Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames, like those.
Does anybody know what that is?
Those like church-based dramas that are like around Halloween that kind of scare people
Very
sometimes
dramatic.
into getting closer to the Lord. And, you go through these like normal traditional things that you grow up in, especially in evangelical circles for an American. And then you start having dissonance with some of the things that you had when you were young in a foreign country,
Sure.
Particularly a country like Zimbabwe. And so my parents were very influential in how I thought about the 3 years that Jesus lived on earth. And the things that he did there were very, very vitally important to me becoming a humanitarian aid worker. And so I was a very low-key kid growing up. And then, Julie and I both went through maybe some of our kind of wrestling at different times in our life. We probably wouldn't have been friends in high school or college.
Dated.
But, then my parents unfortunately are divorced. And so then you go through kind of that church herd of pastor, a missionary,
Yeah.
Obviously feeling how church can sometimes not be the most forgiving or welcoming. And so that also changed a lot of kind of how I experience things, because it could not be my parents' faith. It has to be our faith. And when it was my faith, it wasn't always easy. Because I think in my generation, and I don't know if you all feel this as well, you grow up and you sometimes are taught things that are actually not fully exactly what God meant. And like, he's not always going to relieve your pain. And when it is really quiet, he might not be feeling like he's there. And so I think sometimes the way I grew up, I thought he was always going to answer prayers and he was always going to be there.
Yeah.
And then you figure some of that out. And so just to kind of wrap up, when I moved overseas in 2005, it was petrifying to do that. I moved over to be an aid worker. It was not in the industry I was trained in. But then over that 15 years, there are so many moments where I thought to myself, oh gosh, what is my faith doing at the moment?
Right.
Because it is not easy, to hold a child and have them die in a war zone,
It's
or to be
heartbreaking.
in a terrorist attack, or to have moments where you look at children and you think they're not going to make it, and then reconcile that with sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes our American Christianity, which can be a lot of safety and so
Comfort.
I think I've had a little bit of a journey there, and now I'm married to a pastor. My parents are pastors. And so there's a lot of reasons why Julie and I have come together so well. and in our relationship with God. And it's because we were raised in different experiences, but the core is what is there. And that's what's so vital.
Julie, what was it like for you?
I grew up in a Christian family and, went to church every week, but definitely I would say it didn't become real to me till I was in college. I had said the prayer before and was involved in Young Life, but as I reflect on my life, when I would say I truly surrendered my life to God or understood the gospel in a real way was my sophomore year of college, and definitely had one foot in the world, but would be going to college ministry too, and just kind of wrestling with okay, I believe this stuff is true. I remember I took a New Testament class my freshman year. I wasn't at a Christian college, but it was just a class you could take. Yeah. And I remember reading the New Testament, and I distinctly remember this. I was sitting on my dorm room bed, and I slammed my Bible shut, and I was like, I think this stuff is real, but I'm not ready for it. And then I shoved my Bible aside, which is terrible. But the Lord definitely was pursuing my heart during that time.
Yeah.
And I actually came to Christ through a girl in my sorority, which is not the typical way.
Yeah.
Most people don't think, sign up for a sorority and you're going to come out.
Meet Jesus.
Yes, encountering the Lord. But there was something about the way she would talk about the Lord. Her whole face would light up when she talked about God. And it was such a different connotation of what I had for Christianity before. I had it as, okay, it's the right thing. I'll get more into it later. But I didn't understand the personal relationship, the intimacy, just the excitement that she would have. And she would talk about hearing from God all the time. And I was like, I want to hear from God. And she was like, you totally can.
Yeah.
And so we just started meeting in a coffee shop, and I found myself being incredibly honest with her, just where I was pouring out my life story and telling her things that I hadn't really shared with that many people. And to me, she was really a picture of God's grace and love, because she just met me right where I was. And so I would just put that as a challenge to you guys, too, to be that for others. I was probably one of the most unlikely people in my sorority. I was definitely known for partying and just very much being in that whole scene, but she just really developed a relationship with me and saw there was something God was doing in my life, and just provided a safe place for me to ask questions. And so it was through my relationship with her. And then actually my sophomore year, I went home for a Christmas break, and I'll abbreviate the story, but it essentially, I went out on the beach, as I mentioned earlier. Loved the beach, always been a place where I felt like if there was a God, then I felt closer to God there. And while I was there, I prayed, God, if you're real, show me. My most sincere wish is to know you. And was in that time period where I was really feeling like if God was real, that I wanted to give my life to him, but was just wanting God to show up in a tangible way. And I remember the next day we went out to dinner, and I will say a little disclaimer here that this is not the typical way that God speaks, or would not encourage you to necessarily say, okay, this is what Pastor Julie is saying for how to hear from God.
I can't wait to hear this.
Good.
But we went out to dinner that night, and we went to a Chinese restaurant. And I got my fortune cookie afterwards.
Oh, no.
Have y'all ever heard God speaks in mysterious ways? I got my fortune cookie that night, and I opened it, and it said the exact words that I'd prayed on the beach the night before, which says, your most sincere wish is about to come true. And in hindsight, I didn't know what was happening at the time, but just this rush of love came over me, and I would describe it now as the Holy Spirit, but I just knew that was from God. I knew God was speaking me. I knew he was drawing me. And so shortly after that, I drove back up to where I was going to college, and I found myself listening to gospel music on the radio station, and I was like, what is happening to me?
These weird cravings.
I know. And I remember being okay, I had somehow in one of those classes heard about in the book of Judges how they would turn from God, and then when they were in a desperate place of help, they would cry out to him, and then he would come, and then they would turn back away. And I was like, I don't want to be like the Israelites. God, help me, really give my life to you for real. And so shortly after my sophomore year, I came forward at a church and surrendered my life. And it was one of those whirlwind testimonies where the next thing you know, I was super involved in campus ministry. Yeah. I was feeling like God was calling me into ministry. And I was like, do people know my past? Are they going to hire me at a church?
Yeah.
And I didn't even know what that meant. Felt called to missions. And so it was one of those things where it was just a 180. I joke about how I was on the broad and the crooked before rather than the straight and narrow, but just full-fledged went full heart in once I committed my life.
What was the reaction of your family?
Oh my gosh, they were so excited. They had been praying for years. They still talk about the girl Suzette that led me to Christ, and we're like, that is the best thing. My mom, in hindsight, told me the story about how she had opened up when they had those really big books that you can look at all the different colleges. It's probably all online now, but Pastor Jeff remembers. They had it would be every college in the country, and she opened it up, and it fell open to the college that I went to, and she said the Holy Spirit told her that's where Julie's going to go to college, and she said that's not where I think Julie's going to pick. It didn't feel like what I would choose in the natural. And then I ended up getting a significant scholarship to that school. And when I was there, I just felt like, oh my gosh, this is where I'm supposed to go. But I didn't seem like it would have been the place that I chose. So I think just looking at behind the scenes, how I believe God was drawing me there, and then connecting my path, and then even the sorority that I joined, because the sorority that I joined was known for having a lot of partiers and a lot of fun, but then that had this contingency of Christian girls in it. So it was a little bit more diverse than a lot of the ones. And even just all the places that I ended up where God met me there.
I think it's just so great as we've been having these conversations, and as you even talk to people in the church, getting to hear stories and find that you can't really pinpoint the way that God works, or meets people or finds people, or, the stories are so diverse, and there's a lot of common threads that we find. But then there's just so many, like you said, I wouldn't recommend this, but God did this, and I can't really explain it otherwise. I was having a conversation with my dad just the other day about learning how to drive. And he's very much he knows the way that you're supposed to do something, and he will tell you that, and that was it. That was driving with my dad was very intense. When you're pulling up behind somebody, the bottom of their tire needs to line up with the top of the hood of your car, very, very specific. And it's why, Dad? It's don't ask, just do what I'm telling you. And still those things I think about when I'm driving. But of course, my wife has different things that she learned too. And the reason I say this is now that you guys come together as a unit and you're married, do you find that now as you're, having conversations, or obviously you've known each other for a while, but that you find that you do faith a little bit differently, but like you said, you get to the same place. It's the same Jesus, but the two of you have had different backgrounds growing up. What's that like now when it comes together?
Yeah, I think it wouldn't have worked. We had those conversations way at the start especially because we're older. Obviously, I think most people know I have a son from a previous marriage, so this is not my first marriage. And so we wanted to have those conversations because we both felt such a high level of respect for the other person's experience with their faith and what kind of our faith has looked like. And I think this is something that I wish we, not Capital Life, but as a wider church, did better. We do not all have the same faith experiences growing up.
Yeah.
And we have such an expectation that we are supposed to do it and look like this, and that is the way. And if it's not the way that somebody has met Christ, then there's some sort of aberration to it. And so we've had long conversations. I've said many times that living overseas and seeing some of the things I've seen has caused me to have different views on and commentary on certain things.
Yeah.
But that is why I wanted to be with somebody like Julie, because I wanted and needed somebody that also felt like we are supposed to be in every room, not, I feel like as Christians, sometimes we're so often in an echo chamber and we only want to hear and talk and listen and engage with people that have similar experiences.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't who Christ was. Otherwise, he wouldn't have hung out with prostitutes and tax collectors. And we are just like prostitutes and tax collectors ourselves, and he wasn't. And so that was really core to us, that we said, I have an experience where I did not have this overwhelming Jesus moment. I knew Jesus since I was 4. Yeah. And she had a very different experience. And how does that play out? And then who are the people we want? There should be no one that comes in our home that doesn't feel comfortable. Yeah. So how do we have that conversation around our Christianity, but also around being humans that want to interact?
Sure, or even as co-parents. The next question is who's riding with you in your car? And like you mentioned, you have a son, so you have this family now that you're working together on, how do we parent and what do we do? And, what do we do for school? And those sorts of conversations. And obviously you've been doing this a bit on your own anyway, so now you come together with this. What does it look like when you hand off that faith? You know what I mean? What is it as a parent? And I guess, Craig, you can speak to this first since you've been doing it with Lachlan longer. But
Yeah. I mean, I've been a single parent for 6 years. And that is the biggest challenge I have. Because if I have arguments with God about, I mean, I'll just be honest, the Old Testament God is hard for me.
Sure.
As an aid worker, it's very hard to kind of reconcile some of the things that we read and think through our human minds on that. And so then, but you wrestle with that as an adult. You can wrestle with that. And it's now when you've got your child that you want to make sure you take all the good that you learn from your parents. And now that you're a parent, you're like, oh, holy cow, no wonder there were so many disappointments. It's hard. You take the good and the bad, and you want to now impart that to your son. But I also want him to not go through some of the kind of shock and awe I did growing up. And so it's not easy. And so even when you had said who's in your car, sometimes I feel like we should have a very long historically referenced car, not a current car, because who's in my car are African mamas who have had no rain for a year but are cheering and glorifying God. Those are the people
we got a lot to learn from them.
Those are the people that have shown me how to be a better person. Obviously, my parents are in my car, my wife is in my car, my close friends. But the other thing that's difficult, and I don't know if people already feel that who are a little bit younger than me, but it's very difficult making close friends. I mean, I saw the meme about the least talked about miracle of Jesus is that he had 12 close friends.
At 30-something.
At 30. And one of them betrayed him. So it wasn't that great anyway. But like who's in the car for me are people that have like shaped how I look at Christianity, shaped how I look at myself. And it's a long car. And it's hard in the DC area to keep those close friendships going. And it can be very lonely in that. But it also is people in my car that don't agree with me.
Yeah.
They have to be able to challenge me, and I have to be able to challenge them as well. Otherwise, our faith is not very vibrant.
Totally. I wonder, too, Julie, like you said, you've been doing ministry for 20 years. Now that you find yourself as a parent, does it change the way that you communicate the gospel or like the truth in the Bible?
I mean, I think it definitely, you think through a different lens and think through just how it would be receptive and allowing, Lachlan to come to faith for himself. Yeah. Craig has been incredible in just setting a place where, do devotions in the morning, but also just allowing his faith to become his own versus, versus saying you need to believe this or that he needs to be able to wrestle through those things himself. And I feel like my parents did do that, which I appreciate. But I think in certain environments, it's almost like this is what you need to believe. But I feel like in order for it to become their own, they need to be able to have those type of questions and wrestle. And so, yeah.
And how are you guys intentional about community? And Craig, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but as far as who you're around and how you're developing that faith for yourselves and your family.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this because I would say one of the ways that we are similar is that we both really highly value relationships, which I'm very thankful. I'm like quintessential extrovert whenever I take that test. Like I get like 99 out of 100, which to my husband, he's like, you like to be around people a lot.
I thought I liked to be around
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not necessarily introverted.
I am now.
So it actually works out really well for us because there's certain nights where he's like, absolutely, go to church, or go meet up with those people. Right. But just to be real, like it has been challenging for us. I would say one of the biggest pain points in my life has been transition of friends. I had a core group of really close friends for years and years and honestly thought these would be my people for the rest of my life. And then over the past several years, I've had some pretty deep disappointments in those areas of those relationships shifting. And I am wired, which can be a strength, but it can also be a weakness, to be like deeply loyal to the point where I don't see the handwriting on the wall. Like, this relationship has changed. And like, do we just need to talk through things or we just need to like figure out how it's going to work? My husband has helped me kind of see those things and stand by me and say, pour into relationships that are pouring into you and invest in people that are that mutual putting energy in. And so I would say even as getting married, there's been a lot of like relational shifts and, we moved and bought a house. And so a lot of life shifts within that. But looking at what relationships are meant to stay, and then what relationships are meant to shift, and then how do you develop those core relationships. And we've both just tried to be intentional about it, but also be real about sometimes there's seasons where it's harder and it's going to be things that it's going to look a little bit different. But I feel like it's so deeply ingrained to both of us to have those type of relationships that you keep on trying, you keep on putting yourself out there, you keep on pursuing, and then just kind of asking the Lord and saying, okay, what does it look like for this particular season? So I would say I've had to deal with that like pain and disappointment in my heart over those things, and even honestly some forgiveness. But then not allow it to shut my heart off, or not allow it to try not to let it have any bitterness or any, okay, I'm not going to risk my heart like that again, because I feel like it's so worth it to risk your heart for those type of relationships. But just continually asking God, what does it look like in this season? And then what does it look like for us as a married couple?
I think especially when you're wired for something like ministry or the kind of work that you do, and your whole life is about, making space for others or place for others or whatever, that sometimes that carries over into your relationship, like you said, where you don't even notice, like, oh, of course, I'm being hurt all the time and I'm doing all this work trying to help this person, but it's my job to sort of make this work. And sometimes, we've talked about this previously.
Not always mutual.
Yeah.
And two things that I would say quickly is I've struggled because I have not been in the same location for 20 years. And so I've gone so deep when I lived 6 years in South Africa, and so deep living 6 years in Zimbabwe. And then you have to move. And I know our military, people deal with this all the time, and people that live in this area. And so you pull out. Yeah. And then you don't have the longevity. And then the second thing that I've struggled with is what happens if the people that are closest to you in your car pass away. Yeah. I mean, what happens when you lose like that, like the crutch, the core, the crux of your relationships? Obviously I had a first marriage that did not work. That's a tragedy. Many of us have gone through that either as part of that or as children of divorce or separation. My best friend unfortunately committed suicide, so you lose that. Yeah. And then my sister died of a very brutal battle with cancer. And so, thinking through what do you do to when I don't know anybody closer than I was with my sister. Sure. And of course you have that same kind of dissonance with loss when somebody does take their own life. And so it just reminds you of the fragility of life and the importance that Christ has in driving that car, because he is the only one. At the end of the day, even if you've got all this wrestling with faith and confusions and hurts and pains, he's the only one that's still in that car with you, or that can guarantee that he's going to be there, either with what Julie was saying with friends or with things that we will never control.
As far as listening to things in your car, I want to ask you about your playlist. And what I was thinking about just recently is I tend to put things on shuffle, like when I want to listen to something, and I've gotten really fond of the algorithm. It's just like, hey, play me music I like, because then it's just like, I don't even have to think about it. But sometimes, and I don't know, like I feel like technology is very good at reading me now, and I'm like, why is this playlist so melancholy today? I was just wanting something to like lift me up, and so every once in a while I have to go out and seek that. And so I wonder, what are the things that you go to, not necessarily music, but it can be that, when you feel like you need an encouragement or you need a boost or you just need a lift in your life? You're in a season where you're just like, I need to listen to some party music, metaphorically or really. What do you go to?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, doesn't it? Sometimes I feel like, even because this is an actual music situation, sometimes I feel like I get stuck back in like the early 90s, which is 30 years ago or so.
We're dating
it's
ourselves
retro
a little
now,
bit.
yeah.
Because it reminds me of a time where like I had my sister still.
Yeah.
Or where you get stuck in moments. And sometimes I feel like we're fearful of that. And I'm like, no, look, just sit there.
Enjoy it.
Just sit there with that moment. Because even if you're like, oh, that was an easier time, or that person was here still, or that's all right. Sit there. Just, have those memories. And I think sometimes, like, I'll turn on really angry music if I've had a rough day, or I'll turn on worship, or I'll get stuck with like Dave Matthews or Coldplay or something that I can just go with. But I feel like not musically, my life verses have been pure and undefiled religion is to take care of widows and orphans and remain unspoiled from the world.
James, yeah.
In James 1:27, because I feel like that's to me exactly what Christ did for those years he was on earth was that. And then the second one is Isaiah 61, right? 61. Yeah, 61. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a blessing unto the Lord. And my son's middle name is Oak because of that Bible verse. And then in Africa, oak means best friend.
Oh, okay.
And so those are the moments I turn to spiritually when I need some sort of grounding, because at the end of the day, I know that that's what God wants from us, is to be men and women of righteousness as much as we can be in our impurity and in our fault, and then to take care of widows and orphans.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where I stick. It's safe, and it makes perfect sense, perfect Christ-like sense.
What song defines your early 90s throwback?
I mean, it's What's My Age Again by Blink-182.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
Liz knows it.
I grew up with Blink-182 and like Dashboard Confessional.
Oh my gosh, I don't know how to explain that to my kids. I'm like, there's so much backstory here that you're not going to understand.
Yeah, and like Dave Matthews and, maybe Eminem, but I'm not promoting that. That was a long time ago. That was back when I was...
Have you seen any of these people in concert now that they're all older?
No, I think I went to like a really odd, like boy band, Shaggy, like Christina Aguilera concert like 10 years ago. That was a little awkward, but no. Now we're at like taking Lachlan to Coldplay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Exactly.
Wait, did you go to the last show that was here in town?
No, we have tickets, but they're not
to
in
the one in California.
I was going to say California. They're not on the East Coast, so we're
No,
probably
I
not
knew they were
going.
coming back. I'm so excited for you.
Well, we have to figure out how to get there.
Yeah, you'll make it happen.
Got to get a good car.
Yeah. You can drive a manual,
There
you're
you
fine.
go.
How about you, Julie?
Isaiah 61 is actually one of my favorites too. We had that read at our wedding, and I just love how you're always, like in that passage, you're always God saying who you were and who you're going to become. And so I feel like that's something, and it talks about like the freedom that he wants to give us and who he wants us to be. Mark 8:35 is when, it was actually when I was coming to Christ, I heard that verse everywhere. You know, when you go places, like I wasn't even like in overtly Christian places, like somehow I was in my Western Civ class and they brought up that verse. It talks about losing your life to save it. And finally I was like, okay, God, I get it.
I get it. Yeah.
But just the whole idea of the paradox of the kingdom, that you are giving up your life in order to save it, that in order to go up, you go down. Just the whole Christ mentality, like the more you understand it, the more wisdom you see in it.
Yeah.
And so those have been a couple. And then James 4:8 talks about if you draw close to the Lord, he will draw close to you. Yeah. And I just love that because I feel like it's just an invitation. There's always more that he wants to offer us of himself. And I used to think I would view the spiritual disciplines. I got my doctorate in spiritual formation, which is a lot of the study of how do we position ourselves to go deeper and for change, and what is God's role in change and what is our role in change. And that was a key verse that we talked a lot about, just that God is always inviting us for more. The spiritual disciplines, and instead of viewing them as a list that we need to do or ways that we're like, okay, we need to do these things in order to grow in our relationship with God, they're actually invitations to encounter his love and invitations to encounter his heart. And now when I look at those, I'm like, I have this opportunity today to encounter God's love over me. Or 1 John 4:19 talks about we love because he first loved us. And just like I get to encounter God, the Father heart of God over me today. I get to be reminded of who he is, the depth of his love, how he's pursuing me, how when everything else feels hard, he is my safe place. He is the one I can run to. So I think those are some of my favorite scriptures. And then I love people. And so having just relationships that you can go where you can be like totally unguarded, you don't feel like you have to impress at all. You can just be yourself and process life with. I think those are kind of my safe place. And I would say that with marriage too. That's been one of the most beautiful pictures. It talks about in Ephesians 5, how we are meant to parallel Christ to each other. And of course, we're never going to do it perfectly, but he definitely has seen me at my worst and hopefully at my best. And then to be like, oh my gosh, he still loves me. And oh my gosh, he still wants to spend time with me. And he still wants to process life with me. And that's been one of the most beautiful pictures of God's love to me too. And a lot of you know my story, but I waited many years to get married, and I would say it is so worth it. I remember sitting where you guys were sitting for many years and being like, God, when is my person coming? And just praying.
Eating fortune cookie after fortune cookie.
He wasn't answering that question in fortune cookies. I might have tried. But then to say like, okay, God really does bring the right person at the right time. It's so worth it. And so that's been a real like beautiful picture to me of God's love too.
I feel like because you are so wired for relationship, you must have a few good road trips under your belt. And I wonder, what is your premier road trip song? You know, if you're going to get on the road, the convertible top is down, you're listening to something, what is your jam?
This Girl Is on Fire. I'm just kidding. That is on one of my playlists.
Is it? My daughter loved that song when she could first start talking and singing. It's like, fire, fire. And we play that song. She'd just jam out in the back.
Fire.
So the Holy Spirit. But,
that's just the first one that came to my mind. We like Pandora a lot. We have a lot of like stations that will do kind of like you, or you're say like, play this. And you're like, it just takes you back to different songs or memories. So we have one that's like 92,000 and today that we play a lot.
Yeah.
And that'll be kind of what we'll put on and just kind of turn the music up loud. And I love that we both like sing along in the car. You know, strangers will be be looking at us, but you're just in the moment enjoying life. And so we both love road trips too.
That's my favorite thing, is to look in the rearview mirror and see somebody really enjoying themselves, listening to Alicia Keys or whatever it is.
Yes.
Yeah,
Or your child mortified.
Yeah, exactly. When you guys are driving in a car together or separate, what do you do as far as your navigation system? Are you locked into a navigator all the time? Do you like to kind of get the idea of where you're going and feel it out? How does that work on an actual road trip for you guys?
Well, we just took one in Italy, so I'll let him tell you about it.
Yeah, I mean, in Italy, again, it was the manual vehicle. And so it was 10 p.m. at night, and we got to Hertz, and I was like, do you have any automatics? She was like, yeah, and then they were going to charge me $25. I was like, forget it. I don't want it for $25 extra a day. Yeah. Then I said we were on honeymoon. Then, I said I was an aid worker. I tried everything to get it for free. And they were like, no, sorry. So they said, but we will give you a Renault Clio. So they upgraded us to a little bit bigger car.
Okay.
But it was 10:30 at night, and it was so hilly and so windy, and there was no street lights. And we had like LTE go to like 5G go to E. Oof. And, so then for the first 15 minutes, I was stalling through the whole airport.
And then I was like, should we go back and get that other one?
Yeah, she really gave up on me quick.
No.
Where's that encouragement?
I know.
I just didn't want it to be stressful for you, sweetheart.
Thank you. Too late. And so then I realized the whole time I was stalling because I was going into third. Because it's reverse first, and I didn't want to go to... And so... I finally got us going, and we got off, and we only had like 2 incidents the whole time we were there. But my goal when I am driving is to beat the predicted time I was supposed to arrive.
Yeah.
Which is not mine.
So if it says 12:30, if I get there at 12:29, this is a good day. Yeah. And Julie... is not of that opinion.
Mine is to enjoy life, to have a phone call, to play music. And he's like, how did you get here so much after me? We left at the same time. Yeah. And I was like, I had an amazing ride. I don't know.
Interestingly enough.
I talked to 3 people and listened to a podcast.
We have equal number of tickets.
Oh, all right.
So somebody gets there a little more efficiently. Somebody does it a little bit more enjoyably. And that's what we've noticed in this marriage.
We both
That's
win.
Hilarious. When it comes to your life and faith, what are the practical ins and outs of how you feel like you listen for the voice of God and decide how you're making decisions and what you're going to do when it's a major thing?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, because we talked about this one, I thought this was hard because I've made major, massive life changes. I moved from Washington, D.C. I moved over to Africa totally on my own. I remember they paid me, I think it was like $400 a month and I lived in a converted horse stable.
Oh my gosh.
And I just remember having such depression after I made this choice.
Like,
and I
what did
remember
I do?
making this huge choice and thinking this is God. Like, I believe this is God. This is totally lined up.
Yeah.
And then getting there, and for months and months and months really struggling and thinking, God, have you just totally abandoned me in this? And how do you know that you've made the decision that wasn't like just flesh and just wanting and just, how do I now know that this was God? And that has happened a few times in my life. I remember when I then moved to Zimbabwe, which was obviously worse off than South Africa, and there's no power and no electricity and water, and you're away from your family, and the stress of living under that government and all of those pieces. And then I remember saying to God, what am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
Have I not made the right decision? And being really worried about that. And then looking back on it now, being like, oh, it was absolutely the right decision. And he never says these decisions are always going to be easy.
Right.
No.
He's never promised that. And it can be really hard. It can be really tough at times. It can be really a struggle. But if I hadn't stayed in Zimbabwe, I wouldn't have been what we call in the U.S. government. I wouldn't have been given a chief of party position, which is a project director, which was over a $20 million program and working with 50,000 schoolgirls in Zimbabwe. That's my passion.
Yeah.
But for 12, 15 months before that,
You had
it
to be
was
faithful.
really tough. So hearing from God, it's hard sometimes.
If you could go back and give yourself some advice or some encouragement now, is that what you would say? That, hey, I mean, you know what I mean? It's not going to be as easy as you think, but
Gonna
it's
be
still
worth
God,
it.
or you know what I mean? What would the advice be that you give yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be to step back, and I think it would be to remind myself how much better I have it than it could be. Like, and I know that sometimes comparison is, really problematic. But if I needed to, I could leave Zimbabwe. I could quit my job and just leave. And I had some sort of safety net. So many other people can't do that, and they are stronger in their faith. They've committed more.
Yeah.
And so I just thought to myself, taking a step back and just reminding myself that God always will give you an exit. He'll help. If it's really not meant to be. But if it is meant to be, he will just stand there with you. And maybe you need to sort some things out yourself with your attitude or with your issues. And he'll help you with that. But he's not going to get in there and do it for you. He'll get in there and do it with you. And so I think those are some of the things I would tell myself.
You mentioned African women before, where we both have said we've been in situations in third world nations where we have learned so much from people that had so much less than us. And they just have like a supernatural joy that comes from God. And you're like getting rebuked and inspired at the same time by watching the way they live, by watching their children, by watching just the way that they deal with problems. And it's like, oh my goodness, like you have something that I don't have, and I actually need to learn from you. And so I feel like that's part of what both of our callings and both of our draws are to nations outside of America. And to say, we're not going over just to, pour into them, but there's things that they carry in the spirit that I want. I'm like, I want to be more like you. I want to know how to walk through this. And I want that contagious joy and passion in the midst of so much adversity and so much lack. You've learned things that Scripture talks about, where Paul talks about rejoicing in all different circumstances. You are living that out in a way that is very tangible and real and very inspiring.
So we're coming close to the end here, time of question and response, but maybe you can answer this question with more of maybe an example or a story of what do you do when your car breaks down, when plans don't go as they were expected to go, and things seem dire, or you're just stuck, on the side of the road, metaphorically speaking. What
Call
happens?
AAA.
Yeah. What's a spiritual AAA?
I say
Father,
that,
Son, Holy Ghost.
Well, I say that seriously and joking. I was telling him earlier that I never knew there was a limit on how many times you call AAA in a year.
You just called in a talk.
Until I reached my limit. But But in my defense, I was also helping friends. Like, if you have your AAA car with you, they'll let you do. But I was calling for like the 6th or 7th time in a year, and they're like, ma'am, you've used all your AAA opportunities for this year. So I tend to be a person that calls on help a lot, which I would say is a strength of mine.
Yeah.
When people talk about like some of my leadership gifts, I actually do think that's a strength of like, I love to draw out what's inside of other people and realize we all need help. And I definitely have those people in my life, which I'm so thankful for, that you feel like you can call when you're in those situations and when you need help, whether it be tangible help that you need or you just need somebody that you're safe with, that you can process life with. And so that's definitely, obviously, reaching out to God in those places and just asking Him to come and meet you. I'll quickly say I wrote these out for kind of ways that you hear from God, and I gave a message on this a while back, but I really feel like it helps me think through, okay, when I don't know what to do or I'm in a place, like in the first one, there are 5 CSs. The first one is commanding Scripture and obviously going to God's Word and seeing what He says. But then it's also like, okay, God doesn't always speak. Like somebody mentioned in one of the previous ones, we listened to Pastor Bill and Lisa's earlier. They're talking about Bible roulette and just opening up. So you also need, which is the next one, compelling spirit. You need the Holy Spirit to help you interpret or to help you understand, and just that still small voice. And sometimes, as Craig mentioned, it's clearer than others. Sometimes you're just like, okay, I know that this is what the Lord is drawing me to do. And then other times you're like, I think this is what God is calling me to do, so I'm going to step in faith. And Acts 16 is one of my favorite passages related to that, because Paul is in a place and he doesn't know where to go. And so he starts going in the direction of Asia, but then he has a vision of a man in Macedonia calling him the other way. So that's a prayer that I regularly pray. I'm like, God, if I'm not supposed to go this way, give me a man in Macedonia. So interpreting the Holy Spirit. The next one, we were trying to think of a more modern way to say this, but counsel of the saints, other people. So what did we talk about? Community, social, or something
Sinners, I said, but she didn't want me to say that one. So
basically, other people, and other people can be an incredible sounding board. One of the things that I learned that I think has been really helpful is they can help you discern timing. Sometimes you'll know or kind of be like, I feel like I'm drawn in this direction, and the people that are in the closest places in your life, I can think often be God speaking through them, saying, maybe not now, or maybe this is a step in the direction you can take. People that really know you well and have a vested interest in your life.
As a person who facilitates auditions, musical auditions, and just spent a week, giving people feedback, I think it's just wild how we as humans are often unaware, like have some real severe blind spots. And you do need somebody to say, hey, maybe this isn't the best idea, and or just let me talk to you in a nice way about what just happened and how we can maybe approach this and maybe do it a different way. I'm sure
you're very, very good at that. Some people that are on America's Got Talent or some of those other shows, like, they needed some more people like that in their life.
Sometimes you really want to be honest, and you can't.
Spiritual Simon Cowell.
Yeah. But I really do.
I want him to be really nice, though.
I do feel like there is that element of we do need other people from the outside that we trust and love and know are going to say it in love to just speak
into
truth.
Our lives. Yeah, and I can tell you 20 stories, which I'll save those for another time, of just when people that are close to me have helped me process direction or discernment. Then circumstantial signs, that one can feel a little bit like, But another way to say it is open and closed doors. It talks about in Revelation 3:5 that God will open doors that no man can shut and shut doors that no man can open. And it's not always clear discerning, is this God opening the door or is this just an opportunity? So pursuing those, but looking for those open doors. And then last but not least, as Christians, we don't always remember this one, but common sense. Thinking like, what makes most logical sense? Or even, I remember when somebody was talking about how do you decide who you're going to marry? Like, it's not just this supernatural, like, you're going to hear from God. Sometimes that's how it is.
A man in Macedonia.
Yeah. Did you meet a man in Macedonia? I'm a little confused right now. I was in Macedonia last year.
Yes, my husband did come from Macedonia last year, so the Lord answered that prayer literally. But no, I think that for common sense, like thinking through, do we match? Are we compatible? Thinking through some of those things. And even when you're taking jobs or those things, does it make sense with who I am and what my gifts are and how I'm wired? So those 5 things are kind of things that I look to when I'm seeking God's direction or seeking to hear from Him.
We love talking to Julie and Craig, and there is more to come. Keep your eye on the podcast feed because next time they'll be coming into the C3 showroom to answer your questions. You can find all of our episodes, past and future, at capitallife.org/podcast. And if you enjoy these episodes, we'd love you to share them with a friend however you listen. Apple, YouTube, Spotify, or on the Capital Life Church app, where you can find lots of other great content at capitallife.org/app. If you want to find out more about our young adult group at Capital Life Church or get information about our upcoming activities, go to capitallife.org/C3 and get involved. We would love to have you. Until then, we'll talk to you next time on Where the Rubber Meets the Road.